Welcome to Preaching Innovation Lab, a project of the Kerygma Initiative here at Palmer Theological Seminary. This is a monthly series of short interviews featuring authors of recent books on preaching, books we believe can inspire preachers to think afresh about the theory and the practice of preaching. I'm Dr. David Stark, Director of the Kerygma Initiative and instructor of homiletics here at Palmer. Today, we are excited to meet with Dr. Donyelle McCray. Donyelle is Associate Professor of Homiletics at Yale Divinity School. She also serves as a member of the Executive Board of Societas Homiletica and as a member of the editorial board for the International Journal of Homiletics. A teacher, writer, Episcopal layperson, and preacher, Dr. McCray's work explores the spiritual practices that lead preachers to use less conventional preaching methods. She's the author of The Censored Pulpit, Julian of Norwich as Preacher, and also the book A Surprising God, Advent Meditations for a New World, which she co-authored with Tom Long. Her forthcoming book projects include The Introverted Preacher, Insights and Strategies, and an examination of the preaching and spirituality of Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. Welcome, Dr. Donyelle McCray.
I'm so glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're so glad that you're here. Today, we are discussing your most recent book, Is It a Sermon? Art, Activism, and Genre Fluidity in African American Preaching. Donyelle, this is such a very engaging and a creative book about preaching and genre bending, but it's not simply about that. You also explore deep and persistent questions about authority, tradition, time, truth, and the role of the Spirit in preaching the gospel. I wonder, could you say a little about sort of what problems or questions or opportunities inspired this book project for you?
Well, I really wanted to explore what I call the shoreline of homiletics, the places where preaching bumps up against other forms of discourse. Because I think preaching, the boundaries of preaching are a lot more fluid than sometimes we realize. And that examination of the messiness of genre, the impurity of genre, required studying lay preaching. And I wanted to examine lay preaching on its own terms. So often, lay preaching is treated as kind of the honorable mention in the history of preaching, or also ran backup singers in the history of preaching. But I did not want to accept that ancillary framing of lay preaching because lay preachers have enormous pressures that we don't see in the pulpit, constraints that they're navigating, but they also have some freedom. And I wanted to explore the range of possibilities that emerge when we hold those freedoms and constraints together. And in my study, I just found that the landscape of African American preaching is so broad. And when we honor the fluidity of genre, that breadth really comes to the forefront.
Yeah. Those, as I was saying to you earlier, just powerful and engaging, inspiring insights from this book come out of that work. So thank you for pursuing those questions. A central claim of your book is that preachers would do well to embrace their role as sage, people who pass on the ancestral wisdom that was entrusted to us. What do you think this mode of preaching and its connection with traditions of our ancestors opens up for preaching today?
Well, I think, when we look at this contemporary moment, many of us are experiencing it as a time of unmooring, as a time when there's a heightened sense of vulnerability. And it's almost as if a door that staved off danger has been unlatched. And there's a sense of fear that's emerged for so many people. And I found myself craving the wisdom of ancestors who have navigated similar waters. I want to know how they have framed certain situations, what questions they would ask, what songs, symbols, modes of living they'd see as an anchor. And so, in thinking about preaching, I really wanted to strengthen the bond between the living and the dead. I think good preaching can do that for us. And I also think fidelity to the ancestors lends a layer of credibility to preaching, particularly African American preaching. Toni Morrison was an important guide for me in thinking about the wisdom of ancestors. She really um, emphasizes the fact that an ancestor can help people rise to the occasion, rise to the moment. And similarly, that ancestors help us navigate the absurdities and contradictions of life. And we have so many in this current moment. But they help us ask really important questions like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be whole? What are the aims of human life? What mistakes are we making? And good preaching helps us live with questions like that. Not doesn't rush us to answers, but does help us live with questions like that. And so that's why I was really thinking about the role of the ancestor in preaching.
Yeah, yeah, that's thank you for that. And I love how you, not just in your chapter on Toni Morrison, but really from the beginning and through each chapter, come to it from a different angle, explore it through a different figure and a different homiletical question.
Yes.
Just very, very helpful and useful. So, in your introduction, you write, this book is not about preachers who went hunting for innovative sermons, but more about sermons that sought out preachers who would provide the appropriate brooding space in their hearts for God's dynamic truth. And throughout your book, you lift up the preaching witness of such people, I think, a singer, Mahalia Jackson, a quilter, Harriet Powers, a dancer, Thea Bowman, an intercessor, Howard Thurman, and a parabler, Toni Morrison. I actually wish that we had an hour or more to just talk with you about each of these exemplars, but I wonder if you might lift up for us just one of these figures and talk to us about one innovative preaching practice or one, to use your words, appropriate brooding space making, we might say, that this exemplar invites contemporary preachers into or to try on.
Yeah. Well, I have to credit Milan Nell, a South African homiletician, for this concept of the sermon coming to the preacher rather than the preacher hunting for one. But, often the Spirit will give a preacher a text or an image or a phrase, and the preacher will brood on that, and it will be crystallized in the form of an oral sermon that's delivered to the congregation. But sometimes the message that's been given wants to emerge in a more fluid way. And sometimes that's through dance or through literature, or there's some sung element. And so I wanted to emphasize that hybridity that is also at work in proclamation. And I guess one person that I would highlight is Sister Thea Bowman. She was a religious educator, celebrated religious educator and teacher, and she used a broad range of mediums when teaching and leading congregations. But she loved to lead a congregation in song and dance, and to use that as the means of communicating a message about faith, about relying on God, about trusting that God is making a way out of no way. And well, I'm just amazed by the ways that she would use dance, sometimes as a solo dancer, sometimes singing while others dance, but leading with others was a primary means of doing it. And it required three key things. First, it required openness to the different ways that we know, the different epistemologies. There's some ideas that can be communicated in 3 points, right? And repeated back to, to others on the way out of the church. But there are other modes of knowing that are pre-verbal, or they're kinesthetic. And if you're trying to communicate something that's going to be deeply held in the memory and body of the listener, sometimes another form of discourse will help mediate that message.
Yeah.
And for Sister Thea, it was dance. So there was openness, but there was also a willingness to share power, right? This was not a transactional form of preaching. As much as I love the work of Harry Emerson Fosdick, this was not about delivering the goods, as he speaks, as he says, but about helping the community proclaim together so that the listeners can then hold that set of gestures and song as part of their own physical and spiritual vocabulary and go back to it. And then this was also, third, an assessment of audience, right? What are the needs of this community? She knew that some communities would not be receptive to dance and would not be receptive to singing aloud. So this was a way of assessing what are the needs of this audience and how will they metabolize this message best. So in that respect, I just think she's a remarkable exemplar. I should also emphasize that she did not home in on mastering technique in dance. This was not about highlighting a certain body type or a certain range of abilities. She had her own limitations in that regard, but about helping a community proclaim together.
Yeah, I remember your chapter talking about, you write about participatory dance, sort of those
Yes.
entry points that are not just about a performer with an expertise, but a community building kind of use of
Right.
body and knowledge.
Right. I mean, the thing is, a message can grow in potency if the community is proclaiming it together, if it's shared in that way.
Yeah.
And she was mindful of that dynamic.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Donyelle, for offering your time and wisdom today. I really enjoyed talking with you. And viewers, if like me, you wish you had more time to talk with Dr. Donyelle McCray, let me encourage you to pick up a copy of her book, Is It a Sermon? Art, Activism, and Genre Fluidity in African American Preaching. Thank you again, Dr. McCray.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you all for joining us for this episode of Preaching Innovation Lab. We hope today's conversation sparked new ideas, a fresh energy, and a passion for your preaching ministry. Until next time, grace and peace.